If confessed killer Luis Rivera is telling the truth, Dan Markel's own ex-wife, Wendy, may have financed the hit that took his life.
You said before something about you knew that the total amount equaled $100,000 or something.
Yeah, he gave me 37 in total. Then I asked him, how much you getting? He got like 40 something. I told him, we should just go rob her.
But in another surprising reveal, Rivera goes on to say in this taped confession with police that the murder almost didn't happen. He and the accused triggerman, Sigfredo Garcia, almost never even made it to their destination.
I'm in probation, man. If we get pulled over, I'm gonna go to jail. And we get pulled over.
Okay.
So the day we get pulled over, the officer grabbed my license, came back, gave me a ticket, like, slow down, put the seatbelt. Gave me a speeding ticket. And I'm on my lane. I looked at Garcia and told him, this take me to jail.
So you got a ticket in the Prius on the way up here.
Way up here.
Rivera says it was enough to make him want to abort.
But when we get pulled over, I tell him, yo, this is a sign, man. We should just turn around. He's like, nah, man, that we up here.
His sons were at daycare. He had just dropped them off. He would never pick them up. By the time the neighbor crossed the street, the engine was still running. The door was still closed, and the man inside had a bullet in his skull. Police called it random. It wasn't. Here's what makes this case different from almost every other murder you will hear about on this channel. The man who was killed had spent his entire career at one of the most respected law schools in the country, writing about criminal punishment, about what justice owes its victims, about what it means for society to hold people accountable for taking a life. His name was Dan Markel, Harvard Law, Florida State University, one of the most cited criminal law scholars in the country. And the people who ordered his death did it over a custody arrangement. Not a drug deal, not a financial dispute, not a decades-long feud. A court order saying he had the right to see his own children. That was the problem. And someone in his ex-wife's family decided the cleanest solution was to make him permanently disappear. Then they washed the payment money in a kitchen sink. This is the story of what happened, how they did it, how investigators spent 11 years unraveling it, and why two people connected to this conspiracy have still never faced a single charge. Daniel Eric Markel was born in Toronto, Canada, on the 9th of October, 1972. He grew up the son of Ruth and Phil Markel, raised alongside his sister Shelley in a close Jewish household. By the time he reached high school, his ambitions had already outgrown his surroundings. He had his eyes set on American academia, and he pursued it with the kind of single-mindedness that doesn't leave much room for distraction. He earned his undergraduate degree at Harvard University, studying politics and philosophy. He served on the editorial board of the Harvard Crimson. Between degrees, he pursued graduate work in political theory at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and then at Emmanuel College at the University of Cambridge in England. He returned to Harvard for law school, graduated magna cum laude in 2001, and served as an editor on the Harvard Law Review. He was also an Olin Fellow. After graduating, he clerked for Judge Michael Daley Hawkins on the United States Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit, one of the most selective clerkships in the federal system. He then worked in white-collar criminal defense at Kellogg, Huber, Hansen, Todd, Evans, and Feigl in Washington, D.C., before academia pulled him back entirely. In 2005, he joined the faculty at Florida State University's College of Law as the Dallamberti Professor of Law. He received tenure in 2010, full professor in 2012. He was 32 years old when he arrived at FSU, and exactly where he'd spent his entire life trying to get. His scholarly focus was criminal punishment theory, retribution, proportionality, the death penalty, what the justice system actually owes the people it is supposed to protect. He published in the Harvard Civil Rights Civil Liberties Law Review, the Vanderbilt Law Review, and the University of Pennsylvania Law Review. He wrote opinion pieces for the New York Times, Slate, and The Atlantic. In 2009, Oxford University Press published his co-authored book, Privilege or Punish: Criminal Justice and the Challenge of Family Ties, an examination of how the criminal justice system handles the tension between punishing offenders and protecting family relationships. In 2005, he co-founded Prof's Blog, one of the first and most widely read group blogs for law professors in the country. It was a platform for serious legal debate outside the traditional journal system. He was its intellectual anchor for nearly a decade. His last post on Prof's blog was published 2 days before he was killed. It was an analysis of a death penalty ruling. He was 41 years old. Here's the detail that sits underneath everything else in this case. Dan Markel spent his entire career writing about what it means to hold people accountable for taking a life, about what punishment should look like, about what the justice system owes a victim. He never wrote about what happens when the system takes 11 years to answer. He didn't have to. While at FSU, Markel met Wendy Adelson through JDate, a Jewish online dating platform. She was a law student at the University of Miami, 7 years younger than him, with a master's degree in international relations from Cambridge University. Her family background was South Florida money. Her father, Dr. Harvey Adelson, founded and ran the Adelson Institute for Aesthetics and Implant Dentistry in Tamarack, Florida. Her mother, Donna Adelson, managed the practice's finances as office manager. The family was tight-knit, prosperous, and accustomed to getting what they wanted. On the 26th of February, 2006, Dan and Wendy married at a ceremony in Boca Raton. The announcement ran in the New York Times. Wendy relocated to Tallahassee, joined the FSU law faculty with a focus on human trafficking cases, and the couple had 2 sons, Benjamin, born in 2009, and Lincoln, born in 2010. From the outside, the life looked built to last. It wasn't. Wendy had never been comfortable in Tallahassee. She found it isolating, too small, too far removed from the family structure she had grown up inside. What came out in later trial testimony is more specific than discomfort. Donna Adelson described her daughter's life in Tallahassee as a hostage situation. That phrase was not casual. It tells you how the family had framed this long before any crime was ever considered. This was not a woman unhappy in a marriage. This was a family that had decided, as a unit, that Tallahassee itself was the problem. In September 2012, while Dan was away on a business trip, Wendy packed the marital home, furniture, personal belongings, the contents of the safety deposit box. She took the children and left for her parents' home in Coral Springs. No note, no warning, no indication she was coming back. Dan returned to an empty house and found divorce papers on the bed. He didn't know where his sons were for weeks. He eventually located them in Coral Springs. Wendy formally filed for divorce in September 2012 and requested permission to relocate permanently to South Florida with the boys. Dan challenged the request in family court. The judge denied it. Benjamin and Lincoln would remain in Tallahassee. That ruling was legally clean and completely standard, a court protecting a father's custodial rights. For the Adelson family, it was a wall they could not get around through legal means, so they tried financial ones. According to testimony presented across multiple trials, Donna Adelson approached Dan with a direct offer, $1 million, in exchange for agreeing to let Wendy relocate with the boys. Dan refused. He was not interested in the settlement. He had won in court, and he intended to stay in his sons' lives. That refusal is the hinge point of this entire case. It is the detail most coverage skips past, because it proves this was not a decision made in anger or in a moment of crisis. The money offer came first. It was considered, organized, and delivered. When it didn't work, something else was put in motion. Instead, something that had already been thought about long enough to produce a structured alternative. The legal system had given Dan Markel exactly what he asked for. And that turned out to be the most dangerous thing that could have happened to him. Before we get into how this was set up and who exactly made the calls, hit subscribe right now. This channel follows cases that most coverage drops after the first arrest. We stay until every verdict comes in, and in this case, the last verdict didn't land until 2025. By late 2013, Charlie Adelson had a problem and a contact. Charlie was Wendy's older brother, a Fort Lauderdale periodontist who worked within the family dental practice. On the surface, a well-off professional from a successful family. Below it, a man who had started a conversation that the evidence suggests began at least 9 months before Dan Markel was killed. His contact was Catherine Magbanua. She was 30 years old, his on-and-off girlfriend. She was also the mother of 2 children, with a man named Sigfredo Garcia, a Latin Kings gang associate from North Miami, with a specific kind of operational knowledge that Charlie had no direct path to. That was exactly why Magbanua mattered. She wasn't a participant in the traditional sense. She was a bridge, the single connection between a wealthy South Florida family and the criminal network they needed access to. Garcia brought in his close associate Luis Rivera, another Latin Kings figure from North Miami, who would later become the state's most important cooperating witness. The chain ran in one direction: Charlie Adelson to Catherine Magbanua, Magbanua to Sigfredo Garcia, Garcia to Luis Rivera. 4 people, 4 links. One family at the top who never intended to appear anywhere near the bottom. The financial structure behind it ran entirely through Donna. Subpoenaed records from the Adelson Institute showed she had personally signed 44 separate checks made out to Catherine Magbanua. There was no employment file for Magbanua at the practice. No job title, no documented role, no work schedule, no record of any service she performed. The checks ran from 2014 all the way through April 2016. Regular, consistent payments from a family dental practice to a woman who officially did not work there. 44 checks. Written by the woman who managed the practice's finances, to the girlfriend of the man who pulled the trigger. Dan Markel spent part of his career writing about how financial records expose criminal intent, how money trails are often more reliable than witness testimony because they don't have memory problems. The case against the Adelsons would ultimately be built on the paper trail Donna created inside the very business she ran. Garcia and Rivera made a reconnaissance trip to Tallahassee in early June 2014. They arrived on the 4th, stayed through the 6th, drove the route, mapped the neighborhood, and returned to South Florida without completing the job. 6 weeks later, they came back with a different outcome in mind. On July 16th and 17th, Garcia, Rivera, and Magbanua checked into Tallahassee motels. The following morning was a Friday. Dan Markel's day started the way most of his Fridays did. He drove Benjamin and Lincoln to daycare, dropping them off just before 9 a.m. He then went to Premier Health and Fitness Center on Miccosukee Boulevard for his regular workout. Surveillance footage from the gym and a camera mounted on a city bus route captured a green Toyota Prius arriving in the same window, following him in. At 10:38 a.m., Markel left the gym and headed toward Thomasville Road. The Prius followed. Multiple street cameras tracked both vehicles moving through the Benton Hills neighborhood in the direction of Trescott Drive. Around 11 a.m., he pulled into his driveway. He was still on the phone with a friend. Mid-conversation, he noticed the car sliding in behind him. He said something to the person on the line. The call went silent. Across the street, neighbor James Geiger heard a sharp crack. He looked out in time to see the Prius reversing rapidly out of the driveway. He crossed the street to check. He found Dan still in the driver's seat, the engine still running, and called 911 immediately. "You need to send an ambulance in a hurry," he told the dispatcher. "He is still alive. He is moving." First responders arrived 19 minutes later. Dan was transported to the hospital. He never regained consciousness. On the morning of the 19th of July, 2014, 14 hours after the shooting, Daniel Eric Markel was pronounced dead. He was 41 years old. Benjamin and Lincoln were still at daycare. Approximately 90 minutes after the shooting, Sigfredo Garcia's phone records showed the first call he made. He didn't call a lawyer. He didn't call Rivera. He called Catherine Magbanua. Magbanua then called Charlie Adelson, multiple times across that afternoon and evening. That same night, she drove to Charlie's home in South Florida to collect the cash payment. Charlie told her his parents had just left the house. The bills she received were damp. Donna Adelson had physically washed them before they changed hands. The plan had worked exactly as designed. What they didn't account for was a SunPass toll tag registered to a rented green Toyota Prius and 2 years of investigators who weren't going to let it go. Tallahassee police launched the investigation within hours of the shooting. What they had to work with was almost nothing. Dan Markel had no known enemies. Nothing had been taken from the vehicle. No motive was visible from the outside. No suspect name surfaced in the first 48 hours. Investigators set up a dedicated tip line and got very little back that was actionable. What they had was the Prius. The green Toyota Prius had been captured on multiple cameras, the gym, the bus route, the street network through Benton Hills. But one detail separated it from any random vehicle: a SunPass electronic toll transponder. SunPass was a South Florida technology. It was uncommon in Tallahassee in 2014. This car had not originated locally. It had come from somewhere else, driven north by someone who didn't know that a toll tag is a time-stamped record of everywhere it has ever been. Investigators worked that SunPass record for nearly 2 years. In 2016, it traced back to a rental lot in Miami. The car had been rented under 2 names, Sigfredo Garcia and Luis Rivera. ATM footage then placed Garcia in Pembroke Pines on the day of the trip, same vehicle, same time window. A separate witness described a meeting between Garcia and Rivera at a Tallahassee motel in June 2014 in the reconnaissance trip, a month before the murder, during which Rivera was seen with a revolver consistent with the type used in the shooting. The phone records filled in the rest of the picture. 90 minutes after the shooting, Garcia's first call went to Catherine Magbanua. Magbanua then called Charlie Adelson multiple times across the afternoon and evening of July 18. By April 2016, investigators had identified every person in the operational chain. But identifying them and proving the chain ran all the way up to the Adelson family were 2 entirely different problems. They had the hired hands. They needed the people who did the hiring to start talking, preferably over lines that could be monitored. The FBI designed the operation to make that happen. A team led by Special Agent Pat Sanford sent an undercover agent to approach Donna Adelson outside her Miami condominium. The agent presented himself as the brother of Luis Rivera, a man Donna was already aware had some connection to events in Tallahassee. He handed her a printed news article about Dan Markel's murder, with a dollar amount written on it by hand and a phone number below it. He told her the man had helped her family with a problem up north, that he was going through a difficult time, and that she should make sure he was being taken care of the way she was taking care of Katie and Toto. Donna told him she had no idea what he was referring to. The first call she made after walking away was to her son Charlie. What followed was exactly what investigators had designed the operation to produce. Charlie called Magbanua. Magbanua began trying to identify who the undercover agent actually was. Calls cycled back through the family. People who had spent 2 years believing they were beyond reach were suddenly behaving like people who understood they were being watched. Every call went through monitored lines. Every pattern was documented. Stay with us, because what happens next in court is where this case gets extraordinary. 5 separate trials, 11 years. Evidence that took 6 years of audio technology to make usable. If you're not subscribed yet, do it now. We cover cases like this from the first arrest to the final appeal, and on this one, the final appeal ruling came down just weeks ago. The day after the undercover approach, Charlie met Catherine Magbanua at the Dolce Vita restaurant in Miami. FBI agents had a recording device in place. The audio they captured that afternoon was initially unusable in court. The restaurant was too loud. Voices overlapped. The recording existed, but it couldn't be cleanly isolated into something a jury could hear and evaluate with confidence. It sat in the case file while audio enhancement technology continued to develop. It took 6 years. When the technology finally caught up, State Attorney Jack Campbell confirmed publicly that the enhanced Dolce Vita recording was the specific new evidence that forced Charlie Adelson's indictment. In the enhanced audio, Charlie can be heard saying, "If you're going to charge me, charge me." They didn't mention my name, which makes me think these people only know part of the story. That sentence was spoken in 2016. It was played for a jury in 2023. The monitored calls also revealed something investigators had not anticipated, finding so cleanly the family had developed a private code word for the murder. They called it the TV. In calls captured nearly 2 years after Dan Markel's death, Donna and Charlie invoked it without hesitation, without explanation, without any apparent concern that the phrase required clarification between them. It was embedded vocabulary, the language of people who had spent 2 years operating as though the matter was settled and safely behind them. The bump changed that calculation permanently. Arrests came in sequence. In May and June of 2016, Sigfredo Garcia and Luis Rivera were taken into custody. Rivera, already serving a federal sentence on a separate racketeering charge, entered a plea deal within months, second-degree murder. 19 years concurrent with his existing federal time. In exchange for full cooperation, he described the payment structure, the motel stays, the reconnaissance trip, and the motive as it had been communicated to him. The people who arranged this wanted the woman to be able to move with her children. In October 2016, Catherine Magbanua was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy, and solicitation. Charlie Adelson was not indicted until the 20th of April 2022, nearly 8 years after the murder. He was arrested the following morning by U.S. Marshals at his home in Fort Lauderdale. The Dolce Vita recording had waited 6 years to be heard. When it finally was, it brought down the man who made it, and the woman who had been signing checks from a dental practice in Tamarack for 2 straight years was still out there watching her son get indicted and already thinking about what came next. The first trial began in September 2019, 5 years after Dan Markel was killed in his driveway. Sigfredo Garcia and Catherine Magbanua were tried together in Leon County. Prosecutors laid out the full evidentiary picture. The SunPass records, the surveillance footage, the ATM placement, Luis Rivera's testimony, the phone records from July 18, and the 44 checks Donna Adelson had signed from the dental practice to a woman with no documented role there. Garcia had no credible explanation for his whereabouts on the morning of the murder. The evidence placing him in Tallahassee that day was not circumstantial. It was documented, time-stamped, and corroborated from multiple independent sources. On the 11th of October 2019, the jury convicted Sigfredo Garcia of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The same jury deadlocked on Magbanua. 10 voted to convict, 2 did not. Judge James Hankinson declared a mistrial. She walked out of the courtroom that day, still facing all charges, and still maintaining she had nothing to do with any of it. Her retrial came in May 2022. This time, Luis Rivera testified in full the complete structure of the operation, the payment flow, what was said between Garcia and the people above them before the murder was carried out. The jury that heard it did not deadlock. On the 27th of May 2022, Catherine Magbanua was found guilty of first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and solicitation of murder. She was sentenced to life without parole, plus 2 additional consecutive 30-year terms. 3 down. The chain was climbing. Charlie Adelson's trial opened on the 23rd of October, 2023. Lead prosecutors were Chief Assistant State Attorney Georgia Kappelman and Assistant State Attorney Sarah Catherine Dugan, the same team that had been working this case across multiple trials. Charlie's defense attorney was Daniel Rashbaum, a Miami lawyer who had also represented him during pretrial proceedings. Wendy Adelson took the stand for the 3rd time under a limited immunity agreement. She confirmed the family's awareness of the custody tensions, acknowledged Charlie's repeated joke about comparing the cost of a hitman to the cost of a television, and admitted that someone had in fact hired a hitman. She denied any personal knowledge of who or when. Under cross-examination from Rashbaum, she said the state had it wrong. He asked if she had any involvement. She said absolutely not. Magbanua, already convicted and serving her sentence, testified that whenever Charlie discussed the scheme with her before the murder, he would physically step away and call his mother. She described the night of July 18 in specific detail, arriving at Charlie's home to collect the cash payment. Charlie telling her his parents had just left, and the bills being visibly damp because Donna had washed them before they changed hands. The enhanced Dolce Vita recording was played in full for the jury. Charlie's own words, captured in that Miami restaurant in 2016, and refined by 6 years of audio technology, were heard by 12 people in a Tallahassee courtroom 7 years later. Charlie took the stand in his own defense, a calculated and high-risk decision. Rashbaum argued the evidence was circumstantial, that the state had built a case on the testimony of a convicted murderer with every reason to shift blame, and that the recordings proved curiosity and fear rather than guilt. The jury heard all of it. They deliberated for 3 hours. On the 6th of November 2023, they returned guilty verdicts on all 3 counts: first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and solicitation of murder. On the 12th of December 2023, Judge Stephen Everett sentenced Charlie Adelson to life in prison plus 2 consecutive 30-year terms. 1 week after that verdict, Donna Adelson and her husband Harvey arrived at Miami International Airport. They had one-way tickets. The destination was Vietnam, routed through Dubai. Neither country maintains an extradition treaty with the United States. They were steps from the jet bridge when a law enforcement team led by FBI Special Agent Pat Sanford intercepted them. Body cam footage released later showed Donna resisting as officers attempted to take her phone before placing her in handcuffs. Harvey stood nearby as officers allowed him to remove her jewelry before she was taken away. Harvey Adelson was not arrested. State Attorney Jack Campbell confirmed publicly that investigators had not established sufficient evidence to charge him. What investigators had already established, and what was later entered into evidence, were jail calls Donna made after Charlie's sentencing, but before her own arrest, in which she discussed both the possibility of fleeing to a country without extradition and ending her life. Campbell said the airport move forced their hand. They had the evidence to charge her before she appeared at that gate. Her presence on that jet bridge accelerated the timeline. Donna Adelson's trial began with jury selection on the 19th of August, 2025. She was 74 years old. Her defense attorney, Josh Zellman, framed the airport incident as the act of a traumatized mother, not a fugitive. A friend of the family, Richard Chagrin, testified that the Vietnam trip was discussed as a way for Donna to clear her mind after Charlie's conviction not to permanently disappear. The state did not spend much time on the airport. They played the FBI sting recordings in full. They presented Magbanua's testimony about the night of the murder, the empty house, the damp bills, Donna's parents having just left before the cash changed hands. They called women who had been incarcerated alongside both Donna and Magbanua, each of whom testified that Donna had privately admitted her involvement in the conspiracy and discussed compensating them for their silence. Before sentencing, Donna Adelson addressed the court. She said she never could have wanted Dan Markel harmed. She said she never could have done anything that would leave 2 small boys without their father. The jury had already decided she was lying. On the 4th of September, 2025, 11 years and 47 days after Dan Markel was shot in his driveway, the jury returned guilty verdicts on all 3 counts against Donna Adelson. On the 13th of October 2025, Judge Stephen Everett sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 30 consecutive years. She was transferred to the Florida Women's Reception Center in Ocala shortly after. 5 people, 5 convictions. The last one came 11 years after the first call Garcia made to Magbanua, 90 minutes after the shooting set the paper trail in motion. But the question of who else knew and who else decided has never fully been answered in a courtroom. And that is where this case still lives. 5 people are in prison for the murder of Dan Markel. That is the number every headline settled on. It is also the number that requires the most scrutiny. Before Donna Adelson was charged, the state had identified 3 unindicted co-conspirators in this case. Donna was one of them. She has since been convicted. The other 2 are Wendy Adelson and Harvey Adelson. Neither has been charged. Neither has faced trial. Both remain free. Wendy Adelson testified 3 separate times across the trials of Garcia, Magbanua, and Charlie, each time under a grant of limited use and derivative use immunity. That agreement is specific and consequential. It means the state cannot use her own testimony or any evidence that flows directly from it to prosecute her in the future. She cannot be charged based on what she said on that stand. What she said on that stand was carefully chosen. She confirmed that her mother had offered Dan $1 million to agree to let her relocate with the boys. She confirmed Charlie's repeated joke about comparing the cost of hiring a hitman to the cost of buying her a television. She acknowledged, under oath, that someone had in fact hired a hitman to kill her ex-husband. What she denied consistently, across all 3 appearances, was any knowledge of who arranged it, when the decision was made, or that anyone in her family had moved beyond discussion into action. She moved from Tallahassee to Miami within days of Dan's murder. She has not been charged with any crime. The immunity deal she holds has limits. It does not protect her from prosecution based on independently discovered evidence. It does not cover perjury. It only applies when the state compels her testimony. Whether those limits will ever be tested depends entirely on what investigators have found, or may still find, that does not trace back to anything she said under oath. Harvey Adelson's position is different, and in some ways more opaque. He was standing at that gate at Miami International Airport when Donna was arrested in handcuffs on the jet bridge. The following morning, investigators executed a search warrant on their Miami condominium and left with 2 iPhones and an iPad, all belonging to Harvey. State Attorney Jack Campbell confirmed publicly that the evidence needed to charge Harvey had not been established. He did not say the investigation into Harvey was closed. Then there is a name that almost no mainstream coverage of this case has examined: Rob Adelson, the 3rd Adelson sibling, a physician who has been estranged from the rest of the family for years. He has not been named in any legal proceeding. He has not testified. He has not appeared in any documented communication related to the conspiracy. His estrangement from the family predates the murder. Whether that distance was circumstantial or deliberate has never been publicly established. Dan Markel spent years writing about the space between what a justice system can prove and what it actually knows, about how often those 2 things occupy entirely different territory, and how that gap is where the system most frequently fails the people it is supposed to protect. His own case is the most precise illustration of that argument he ever produced. 5 convictions, 2 people the state called co-conspirators who have never been indicted, a search warrant executed on a retired dentist's electronics with no charges to follow, and a murder that, by the state's own framing of the conspiracy, required a level of family coordination that 5 convictions alone cannot fully account for. The courts have answered the question they were given. The question underneath it is still open. Charlie Adelson did not accept his conviction quietly. His appellate attorney, Michael Ufferman, filed an appeal arguing that the pretrial publicity surrounding the case had made a fair trial in Leon County structurally impossible. The numbers were specific. Of 96 prospective jurors who had heard about the murder, 54 had already formed an opinion about Charlie's guilt before they sat down. All but one of those 54 believed he was guilty before a single piece of evidence was presented. On the 1st of July 2026, Florida's 1st District Court of Appeal issued a 24-page opinion written by Judge Lori S. Rowe and joined by Judges Thomas D. Winokur and M. Kemmerly Thomas. The panel unanimously rejected every argument Ufferman raised. The court found that the defense had failed to properly preserve its venue challenge under Florida procedural rules. The motion had been made orally rather than in writing, as required, and that even under a full review, the record did not demonstrate that an impartial jury had been denied. Charlie Adelson's conviction and life sentence were affirmed in full. State Attorney Jack Campbell described the ruling in one word. He said it was well decided. Donna Adelson's appeal is currently pending before the same court. While the legal proceedings were grinding forward, something else was being built in parallel. Dan's mother, Ruth Markel, did not wait for the trials to end before she started working. She collaborated with Florida lawmakers to draft and pass the Markel Act, a state law that grants grandparents visitation rights when a parent has been linked, either criminally or civilly, to the death of the other parent. The law was a direct legislative response to the custody architecture that prosecutors identified as the root cause of Dan's murder. A family court ruling that was entirely standard became the trigger for a contract killing. Ruth Markel decided that if the law had a gap that wide, it needed to be closed. Dan's close friend Jason Solomon founded Justice for Dan Inc. in the immediate aftermath of the murder. The organization grew to thousands of supporters across multiple countries. 10 years after Dan's death, it launched a scholarship in his name funding law students pursuing research in the areas Dan spent his career developing. Criminal punishment theory. Retribution. What accountability should actually look like. Prof's blog, the legal blog Dan co-founded in 2005, is still online. His final post, an analysis of a death penalty ruling, was published 2 days before he was killed. It has never been taken down. It is still there. Benjamin and Lincoln Markel are teenagers now. They were 3 and 4 years old when their father was shot in his driveway. They have grown up entirely inside the aftermath of a decision made at a family dinner table by people who concluded that a custody agreement was a problem worth eliminating permanently. Here is the detail that closes this story. Dan Markel spent his entire professional life arguing that criminal punishment must be principled, that it must be proportionate to what was actually done, that the justice system owes its victims something honest and accountable, not just a result, but a reasoned one. He published that argument in some of the most respected legal journals in the country. He taught it to hundreds of students. He wrote his last public post about it 2 days before he died. The people who ordered his death made one central calculation, that the chain between them and the crime was long enough and structured enough that it would never be traced back to a family dental practice in Tamarack. They were wrong. It took 11 years, 5 trials, a toll tag on a rental car, 6 years of audio technology, an undercover agent handing a grandmother a piece of paper outside her condominium, and a jury deliberating for 3 hours to get there. But the system Dan Markel spent his career writing about eventually answered him. The question he never got to write about, what happens when it only answers him partway, is still open. If this case held you from start to finish, subscribe right now, because this channel exists for exactly this kind of story. The ones that take 11 years to close. The ones where 5 convictions still leave 2 names unindicted. We cover the full picture every time, from the first arrest to the final appeal ruling, and everything the headlines skipped. Drop your thoughts in the comments, especially what you think about Wendy and Harvey. And if someone in your life needs to hear this case, send it to them. We'll see you in the next one.